let's have a small talk about story mode. Not in the sense that games have stories, campaigns that have a beginning, a middle, an end, and characters and events that happen. No, I mean the concept of a story mode for people that cannot really be bothered to play the game as it was initially meant to be played. Believe it or not, I actually had this penciled into the schedule before Cuphead came out and proved to be the Dark Souls of... Oh, god damn it. Stop with the Dark Souls already. Forget it. You never played Ghosts and Goblins. Not everything's the Dark Souls of something. But hey, Cuphead made things even more relevant than they would have been normally. The deal with Cuphead is that it is a boss rush game, meaning you fight bosses, exceedingly difficult bosses at times because you have little indications sometimes about if you're actually damaging them, how far you have until they actually die, and yeah, pretty much that being a bit more clear would have fixed things quite well. Other than that, it's a completely beautiful game with charming aesthetics that draw people in, people that are not prepared for this kind of game. So is it fair that those people would have an easier game experience than it was intended to be? I mean, they do have one. There's an easy mode that locks about the last 10% of the game, so you don't actually have the ability to play that if you're on easy mode. Is that a good way to do it? Is even having an easy mode right? Now I'm saying this without actually playing Cuphead, so I don't know exactly how easy the easy mode would be. But it does bring again the argument that was instilled a long time ago when, what was it, I believe Dragon Age 2 or Mass Effect 3 or something about BioWare was going to come out, and one of the developers said that it would be nice if you could just skip all the combat of the game. But to be fair, Mass Effect has horrendous combat, so skipping it is an improvement altogether, so I completely agree with that. But that does bring into question one thing. One very important thing. What does people wanting to skip over portions of your game actually say about it? It sort of says that you should have probably not bothered with those bits or made them in a better way. It sort of says that all that combat you stuffed in there is just worthless filler without any actual enjoyment. Because here's the thing, a good game, like a really good game, will pretty much be a cohesive chunk where you can't separate one bit from the other because everything flows from one portion to another in a way that makes the player want to enjoy everything and gives the player the tools to enjoy everything. That's why some of the best RPGs around aren't just limited to shoving you into combat. You have alternatives. You can avoid combat, you can discourage people from fighting you by threatening them, by being very eloquent, by just having a lot of NPCs with you that will do the job for you. There are multiple ways to resolve conflict than just outright combat. Engaging ways, interesting ways, ways that will appeal to people who don't like the combat system that you have made in your game or don't like combat in general. But that is built into the design. That is what the game was created upon. Whereas having the skip combat option sort of takes away from it, sort of lessens the effect. You may as well be just watching a YouTube video of it, since most games, well, not all of them, but a whole bunch of them do rely quite a lot on combat and actually having content, and outside of the combat there being really not much more to them than semi-interactive graphic novels. Now, I'm not against the idea of there being a story mode for people that don't have the ability to play the game. I was paralyzed. I know what it's like to not be able to do anything, but still wanting to enjoy something, like being able to close your eyes. So it's important to at least try and make a game that will from the onset have an option to allow people of limited capacity to play. But should you also cater to the people that can't really be bothered to actually make an effort of engaging with your game? That's a bit of a problem. That's something I wouldn't say I wholeheartedly agree with, because once you start getting to people that just don't care about the combat system, why do you even bother having one? Since people don't really care, there's an incentive to actually not make one that's good, that's engaging, that's at the level of Divinity Original Sin, or even surpassing it. Yes, I know this is a slippery slope argument, but in game development it's kind of true. I remember there was a discussion a while ago, I believe it was on Game Trailers, on their podcast, when I think one of the developers of Call of Duty was called into question about implementing microtransactions into the game's progression, into the multiplayer progression. And there came the question of, well, how can I trust you to have a normal, achievable progression that's reasonable when you have an actual monetary incentive to skew that progression in favor of those who pay money, or actually force people to pay money. And we've seen this happen. Pretty much every multiplayer game that has a progression system has ways to circumvent it. At a certain point, it is just mind-numbingly dull and uninspired and completely, absolutely horrid. Now imagine that idea implemented into the combat system of a Bioware game. It would be so far removed from what Baldur's Gate had that it may as well make The Witcher 1's combat system seem like the one from Divinity Original Sin. But again, it's a slippery slope argument. But if the developer and the publisher have integrity, have a belief in their product, which, let's face it, is not an Electronic Arts thing, it would not be a problem. It's a question of trust. Can I trust a developer when they set out to implement a way to let people who can't be bothered with the combat or with another portion of their game to actually make a good game all around, when they can just half-ass it? Because the majority, statistically speaking, will try the easier mode on account of it would reach the large amount of people. Well, again, that depends on the publisher, the developer, on the people, on the marketing, on whoever pulls the strings behind the curtain, probably some soap company. But there are instances in the past when this has happened and it actually worked out fine. System Shock 1. Do you remember it having a story mode? I do. It had an option when you start a game to set the difficulty level for everything possible. You could set the difficulty level of the puzzles to be none. You could enter the game and have all the puzzles already solved for you the moment you touched them. This was an easy mode, and it did detract from one of the core aspects of the game, the puzzles. But the thing is, the puzzles themselves weren't awful, they weren't horrible, they weren't the kind of thing that you just say, oh, I'm just gonna skip these because they're the same thing over and over again. Some of them were actually quite nice. Sure, sometimes a bit repetitive, but it worked. Now, should that mean that something like Dark Souls should get its own easy mode? What would you even do with it? Give it proper controls? A save game feature? Well, yes, those things would improve the experience immensely, and honestly not detract much from the experience itself. It would just sort of tone down from the bullcrap associated with the series, but actually lowering the difficulty of the game, making the bosses, the enemies, everything deal less damage, making you have more health, making items easier to find, giving your weapons more power, that could ruin it. Because when you have a game like this that's easy to the point where actually just playing it, just getting to somewhere isn't an achievement anymore, you take away the core of it. You take away the essence of what made it satisfying. Getting pummeled to death by some boss 10 times in a row and having to trudge through most of the level from the last bonfire back there, stopping from place to place to collect some essence or whatever it was that made you human again, and some healing vials called Estus for some reason. What's with people and renaming stuff that's already known? It's like that game that no one remembers having stupid words for things like terrorists, calling them errorists. But you do get to beat the boss in the end, and it feels so good because you know you tried, you know you had a tough fight, that it was something that other people may not achieve, that you beat those people, you beat the game, you triumphed. And if it was easier, if it was something that anybody could have done with no preparation, with no skill, that ruins it. Well, let's face it, Dark Souls, not that much into the story aspect. I mean, it's mostly conjecture and wikis and indirect references from items but still there are good parts to it. Parts that are amplified by the fact that just getting there wasn't easy. Because if you could have just walked, could have just gone on a little stroll and got to the end, it would have undersold the core idea of the game, that this is a brutal, harsh world where everything dies, where everything is death and suffering and endless torment. A game like this should not have an easy mode. It should have actual bindable controls that work properly on a mouse like it's the year 2005, and thankfully the second one does. Let the enemies die completely after you munch them to death a bunch of times, so actually moving from one place to another doesn't become a chore. Also, you can teleport from the start, so that's an improvement, but it doesn't need to be easier. Some games just do not need to be easier. They just need people to understand them, and they need to be built to be understandable. Using the Dark Souls series again as an example, they're obtuse as hell and over-reliant on wikis. They are not really great at informing the player about things, and honestly, that's how you solve the issue of needing an easy mode. Have a better tutorial. The kind of tutorial that isn't absolute crap. The kind of tutorial that doesn't talk down to the player and pretends it invented camera movements and, walking, but the kind of tutorial that actually teaches the player how to play the game itself. Like this game, not every game. This game. This exact game. And for that to happen, the developers need to be intimate with their mechanics, with what the players are expected to do, with how the AI reacts, with how everything moves. And the less verbal you make it, the better. The more the player feels like they'll learn something and then just read it off something, repeat it, and then forget about it, the more chances you've got that the player will understand what you want of them in every situation. A good example of this is probably Portal. The essential thing that game taught you in the tutorial phase was how to think with Portal. Yeah, it taught you how buttons work, but that's not the important thing. It taught you how to think with portals. And from there, it let you keep on thinking with portals until you either found out how you could beat the puzzle in the intended way, or figured out how to use portals to their maximum potential and outright break the puzzle. If Portal had a story mode, if Portal had a skip puzzle mode, an easy mode where you just move from one side of the level to another, why would you even play it anymore? For the jokes? For GLaDOS making puns? You could just watch that on YouTube. There's no satisfaction there. There's no game. And that's honestly my biggest fear. That in emphasizing things like a story mode to draw in people that would normally not play games, you're not going to be making games anymore. You're going to be making Gear Esther. And that would be the end of games, because they wouldn't be games. And the bad part is it sort of started already. It started a while ago. Not just combat being horrible, but some games have absolutely crappy puzzles that are just filler. But the worst offender of all is dialogue. People skip dialogue. Some skip it because they don't care, others skip it because they know what the dialogue is and know they have no reason to care because it's just bad, it's filler. And when they do try and read it, they realize, oh my god, I spent 30 seconds reading this. I could have done literally anything more productive, anything more enjoyable than reading this drivel. That's especially valid for quest dialogue in RPGs and a lot in every MMO. Story in MMOs in general. It's not a pretty sight. When a core component of the game is just turned into something disposable, everything suffers. Everything. It devalues the whole thing. So what's your take on the concept of a story mode? I'm curious to know what your ideas about approaching it would be. Goodbye.